Excellencies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you all. Thank you for being with us for what is slated to be an intense session on lifelong learning. Now, we all know that SDG 4 itself sets the tone by stressing the necessity to ensure lifelong learning for all by 2030. However, long before the SDGs, the world has been talking about learning that lasts from the cradle to the grave. But times have changed, and with them, the traditional take on learning for life. Indeed, the days are gone where getting a certificate or a degree was deemed sufficient for settling down into a career. Today, even the notion of a lifelong career has been put to test, questioned even. This is not surprising in a world that increasingly is becoming complex and uncertain. We had a clear sign of this during the COVID-19 pandemic that sharply exposed our underlying vulnerabilities, including in our education systems. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we stand at the crossroads. The rise of automation, artificial intelligence, big data, and other changes brought about by Industry 4.0 and the future of work have spelled the need to reimagine the role of education. On top of it, globalization has produced outcomes and processes which make of the learning of new skills and the development of competencies of paramount importance. As for traditional sectors of the economy, they are fast giving way to emerging and complex sectors that call for both adopting and adapting. In this world of rapid changes and uncertainty, what we now need are persons who are willing to engage in learning throughout their lives. The future, it is clear, belongs to those who have the motivation to learn, unlearn, and relearn ad vitam. In short, skilling, reskilling, and upskilling of the workforce is now a sine qua non for survival. And in such a context, we are more inclined to see lifelong learning as a human right, as a common good. And that begs the first of my questions. What models of skilling and reskilling should we be looking forward to? There are other questions too. What types of policies and practice should be put in place to ensure access to knowledge and employability of youth in an increasingly shifting and evolving environment? Today, when we are focusing so much on the social capital of communities, what role can communities play in strengthening lifelong learning? What lifelong learning frameworks should be put in place? In my country, we have placed a premium on recognition of prior learning as well as recognition of prior experience. What do the international experience and good practices tell us about the components of this framework? And what about a model of lifelong learning for teachers and educators whose skills have to be constantly and continually upgraded? How do we ensure that they adapt their pedagogies to the present context, to the current context? These are just some of the questions and such others that our keynote speaker will certainly be addressing. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me a brief introduction of Professor Olaf Zawicki-Richter. Professor Zawicki-Richter has a wide experience and a wide expertise in educational technology. Indeed, he has over 25 years of professional experience in the domain, and that covers open, distance, and digital education. The number of publications, some 150, I believe, are testimony of his mastery of the subject. Professor Zawicki-Richter is the Dean of Faculty of Education and Social Sciences and Director of the Center for Open Education Research at the University of Oldenburg in Germany. He has also served as a consultant and advisor, and that includes his professional competencies placed at the service of the ILO, the Office of Technology Assessment at the German Bundestag, and the German Science and Humanities Council. Dear delegates, you would also wish to know that Professor Zawicki-Richter is the last doctoral student of Dr. Otto Peters, one of the founders of open distance teaching universities in Germany. Professor Zawicki-Richter, you have the floor, please. Thank you.
Dear Minister Dookun, thanks for the kind introduction. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, thank you for inviting me to PCF 10. Thank you very much for your hospitality. It's my honor and my pleasure to give this keynote here today on the contribution of open and distance and digital education to lifelong learning. We want to touch 1 million lives. That's a quote from the Director of Training of an international training center of the United Nations regarding the outreach and impact of online distance learning on worldwide training activities. But let me start by giving an overview of my talk. In the beginning, I will put my topic into some historical context, starting with the world education crisis in the 1960s and the following developments of open education systems and lifelong learning. I will describe the elements and features of open distance and digital education, ODDE, and lifelong learning to see what are the similarities between these concepts and what ODDE can bring to foster and sustain lifelong learning opportunities. After these more theoretical considerations, I will present an impressive good practice example of a global training provider of the United Nations, the International Training Center of the International Labour Organization in Italy. I will then finish with some future perspectives in educational technology, especially in artificial intelligence applications and their potential for ODDE and lifelong learning. All right, then let's start our journey. I take you into the more distant past. This is King's College in Cambridge in the United Kingdom, founded in 1441. At the medieval universities, access to higher education was really an elitist activity. When you travel a bit further out of town, about 5 kilometers, you find the Institute of Continuing Education at Madingley Hall. I can tell you this building looks much better than our building at the Center for Lifelong Learning in Oldenburg at my university. This is what a student apartment looked like around this time. In 1861, Edward, Prince of Wales, arrived at Madingley. His mother, Queen Victoria, had rented the hall as a residence for her son, whilst he studied at the University of Cambridge. I guess they had a lot of good student parties in that building. In Germany, we also have universities that are over 700 years old. The University of Göttingen was founded in 1737 during the time of Enlightenment. It is a leading research university in Germany. They have produced over 45 Nobel Prize winners. This is a picture of members of the student union in the 1950s at the University of Göttingen. Access to a university education used to be a privilege of a few. In the 1950s, in industrialized countries, an average of barely 5% of an age group took up academic studies. The traditional student profile was that of a person under 25 years of age, male, financially independent, who studied full-time, and they went directly from school to university. What has changed? In Germany, since the 1950s, starting from about 5% entry rate into higher education, we have seen a massive expansion of the higher education system. Over the last decade, well over 50% of the students go from high school to higher education. Today we have 423 higher education institutions in Germany. To meet the demand for higher education and as a response to a massive shortage of qualified workers in the 1960s, new universities were founded in the 1970s, among them the Fernuniversität in Hagen, Germany's dedicated distance teaching university, and also my own university in Oldenburg. And a new type of higher education institution was established, the Universities of Applied Sciences. We have 211 of those today. So this was the situation in Germany around that time, of what happened in the 60s on a global scale. Despite the enormous growth of educational systems after World War II, a UNESCO conference in 1967 warned the international community of a worldwide crisis in education. Education systems had adapted too slowly to respond to the growing demand for higher education at a time of economic and scientific prosperity. In Coombe's book, it reads, "Since 1945, all countries have undergone fantastically swift environmental changes brought about by a number of concurrent worldwide revolutions in science and technology. Educational systems have also grown and changed more rapidly than ever before, but they have adapted all too slowly in relation to the faster pace of events on the move all around them. The consequent disparity, taking many forms, between educational systems and their environments is the essence of the worldwide crisis in education." The report concluded that true innovation was needed to meet the needs of a much larger and diversified group of learners, and such considerations led to the establishment globally of open and distance learning systems. With a view from the 80s, Coombs praises the establishment of the Open University as perhaps the most outstanding example in recent times of a truly radical and fundamental education innovation, not just a piecemeal innovation at the edges of an established system, but one that created a whole new teaching and learning system. It is important to realize the conceptual development of distance education after the Second World War. In the 50s and 60s, a remarkable movement advocated open learning in England. In the 70s, there was great interest in non-traditional studies and adults as learners in the USA. Universities without walls were created. The most prominent example is the Empire State College, a college dedicated to adult students. In 2019, members of the Center for Open Education Research met at Maltepe University in Istanbul to agree on an understanding of open education for the center. We said, and this is published in an article in iRodel, that open education refers to a set of educational practices in which the notion of access is complex and has broadened over time from the initial understanding of it relating only to university entrance. Such efforts are supported by a variety of media, learning materials, assessments, tools, and systems to provide flexible learning opportunities. And the elements of open education are, of course, the modus operandi of open and distance learning, a commitment to open education practice and scholarship, and the development and sharing of open educational resources. Going back into history again, I already mentioned that ODE universities were established in the 60s and 70s as part of education reform responding to the world education crisis. This picture shows the laying of the foundation stone of the Fernuniversität in Hagen, with the founding rector Otto Peters in the middle. To his left is the then Minister of Science, Johannes Rau, who later became the President of Germany. Based on an international study in which Peters visited distance teaching universities in the 1960s to prepare the foundation of such a university in Germany, he developed his famous theory of distance education as the most industrialized form of education. Peters applied the principles of industrialization to describe distance education systems and subsystems, such as the division of labor, standardization, and quality assurance in the instructional design process. This is the original German publication of his book in 1973. And that's the main entrance of the Open University in Milton Keynes. You see, compared to the buildings in Cambridge, this clearly looks less elitist. The OU UK is considered the mother of Open University, founded in 1969 in Milton Keynes. And in a speech at the founding of the university, the Prime Minister Harold Wilson said, "The aim of the OU is to widen the opportunities for higher education by giving a second chance to those who can benefit from it, but who have been, for one reason or another, unable to go to university or a college on leaving school." So the raison d'être of Open University is to widen access to higher education opportunities for a non-traditional student population, to enable mass higher education, or as Peters wrote, distance education paves the way from elitist education to mass education. Around the same time, in the 70s, the concept of lifelong learning was widely discussed, inspired and promoted by the lifelong learning policies of UNESCO, the OECD, and the European Commission. The famous UNESCO report in 1972, Learning to Be, led by the former French Minister of Education and Prime Minister Edgar Fauré, proposed a future of a learning society, which implies that every citizen should have the means of learning, training, and cultivating himself freely available to him, I would say to her today as well, under all circumstances, so that he or she will be in a fundamentally different position in relation to his or her own education. And the following sentence is important. I will come to this back later. Responsibility will replace obligation. The Commission of the European Communities published the Memorandum of Lifelong Learning in 2000, in which the CEC conveys key messages in order to develop and establish them: new basic skills for all, innovation in teaching and learning, valuing learning, rethinking guidance and counseling, bringing learning closer to home, thereby addressing learners in their everyday life and work situations. Lifelong learning is seen as a way for individual development, securing employability, and dealing with societal risks. In 1986, right after the Chernobyl disaster in the Ukraine, Ulrich Beck, a sociology professor at the University of Munich in Germany, published the original German text Risikogesellschaft. The risk society is the manner in which modern society organizes in response to risk, such as environmental pollution, risks due to nuclear energy and hazards, the social effects of globalization, and of course climate change. The digital transformation today also raises crucial questions about digital exclusion and opportunities for access to education, to develop digital skills, that are prerequisites for participation and engagement in social processes. I want to use Beck's words and understanding of modernization to describe the process of digital transformation as the most profound modernization in our age. He understood modernization as searches of technological rationalization and changes in work and organization. But beyond that includes much more: the change in societal characteristics and normal biographies, changes in lifestyle and forms of love, changes in the structure of power and influence, in the forms of political repression and participation, in views of reality, and in the norms of knowledge. In social sciences, understanding of modernity, the plow, the steam locomotive, and the microchip are visible indicators of a much deeper process which comprises and reshapes the entire social structure. I think it is obvious that the digitization has an impact on all those changes, views, and dimensions that Beck describes here. This leads us to the digital transformation and the shift to digital education. As Desmond Keegan wrote in 1995, the world is growing digital. To illustrate digital transformation, I like to use this image from the Pope's election in 2005. You see only a single cell phone here on the bottom right on this image. The election of the new Pope in 2013 shows this picture. This is digital enlightenment. The digital transformation affects all areas of society: how we teach and learn, how we communicate and make business, science and culture, our financial systems, politics and healthcare. Digitalization has an enormous potential for the development of individuals, institutions, and the whole society. But on the other hand, there is a high risk of people being excluded from these vital societal systems. The European Union defines digital inclusion as the way to ensure that everybody can contribute to and benefit from the digital economy and society, underlining three pillars: access to digital devices and internet connectivity, capability to use digital devices effectively and efficiently, and the quality of digital services designed to meet the needs of users, including vulnerable people. With regard to lifelong learning, I would like to focus on capacity building for inclusion and participation in a digital society in all educational settings, formal, informal, and non-formal. In the digital society, digital skills are a basic literacy, a cultural technique like reading or writing. There are many studies dealing with future skills that describe competence, models, or profiles. However, the concept of future skills is not clearly defined and operationalized. Experts from the EU and the UNESCO member states discussed the key role of adult learning and lifelong learning in promoting competitiveness, employability, equity, social inclusion, and active citizenship at a conference in Lithuania in December 2013, and they referred to the so-called 21st century skills, which are abilities or attributes that can be taught or learned in order to enhance ways of thinking, learning, working, and living in the world. Such skills include, for example, critical thinking, learning to learn, communication, collaboration, and information literacy. Digital skills can be developed and fostered through ODDE. Being engaged in an online environment, learners can develop digital skills through learning activities, collaboration, communication, and knowledge creation in online digital learning environments. In Germany, the Standing Conference of the Ministers of Education, the KMK, published a policy document, Education in the Digital World, with a model that includes 6 digital skills dimensions for searching and processing data, communicating and cooperating, producing and presenting, privacy and data protection, problem solving, analyzing, and reflecting. The KMK strategy set out the goal that every student should be able to use digital tools and have access to the internet wherever deemed useful in lessons from a pedagogical point of view. And this leads us to the disruption of face-to-face education and the sudden shift to online learning on all levels during the COVID-19 pandemic. UNESCO, UNICEF, and the World Bank recently published this report, The State of the Global Education Crisis, A Path to Recovery, which is dealing with the impact and consequences of the so-called emergency remote teaching, ERT. It is interesting to see here again the notion of the global education crisis as a prevailing leitmotif from the 1960s. The shift from face-to-face to ERT was often perceived in various publications as disruptive, aggressive, disastrous, and unwelcome. ERT resulted in mostly synchronous class meetings and the recordings of lengthy video lectures. Obviously, in many cases, there was no time or expertise for careful instructional design. Or as Rapanta and his colleagues conclude, ERT has very little in common with carefully planned online learning and teaching. Nevertheless, we can see that online distance education and training have now moved from the margins to the epicenter of education. With the emergence of new information and communication technologies and networked computers, Alan Tate, the former vice president of the OU UK, already observed in 1999, and I love this quote, "The secret garden of open and distance learning has become public, and many institutions are moving from single conventional mode activity to dual mode activity." And Yunhong Chao wrote prior to the pandemic that distance education is no longer learning at the back door, as suggested in the title of Wiedemeyer's work. It is now learning through the front door of higher education. I think we can conclude that this is today more true than ever. I would like to stress here that there is no future without origin. We can build upon over 50 years of theory, research, and practice in distance education to foster lifelong learning and digital education. Some would say 150 years. It is essential that current practices in any form of digital education should be strongly rooted in the body of knowledge and research-based evidence of distance education. But recently I often have a déjà vu when I participate in meetings about the digitization of learning and teaching, also at my own university, which is a conventional on-campus university in Germany. Let me give an example. I found this book title on my bookshelf, Delivering Digitally. The chapters in the book on the development of digital education are dealing with issues related to instructional design, learning innovation and change, professional development, the technical infrastructure, intellectual property, etc. The full range of topics that we discuss today when we talk about the digitalization of teaching and learning. So when do you think this book was published? In 1999. So open, distance, and digital education has clearly moved into the mainstream of education and lifelong learning, and those who have a background in distance education have an advantage because we do not have to reinvent the wheel. The history goes back over 150 years, and we should be aware of that and learn from the experience and research in distance education. Otherwise, as George Santayana puts it, we are condemned to repeat the past. At this point, let me summarize the similarities of ODDE and lifelong learning, the characteristics and features that are interrelated, aiming at the design and implementation of learning opportunities throughout the lifespan. Both formats respond to significant new trends in society, issues and challenges in the global education crisis. They perform a special humanistic mission as they endeavor to achieve the social advancement of disadvantaged groups of people previously underrepresented in education. They are dedicated to human self-development, widening access to education on a great scale. They have tremendous innovative impact on educational systems and institutions. They transform conventional education institutions and strike against educational patterns, traditional educational patterns. They establish new pedagogical approaches and apply new methods and media. They support formal, informal, and non-formal learning and emphasize the capacity of self-directed learning and, on the other hand, support collaborative learning. They are committed to counseling, tutoring, mentoring, and learner support systems, linking learning to the workplace. They are similar in the ways they manage time, space, and human resources, and see capacity building as the key to inclusion, engagement, and a better quality of life. All these similarities, and there might be more, suggest that ODDE and lifelong learning correspond to each other, complement each other with regard to significant trends, issues, and challenges in our society. Against this background, I would like to move on now to a good practice example. The International Training Center of the International Labour Organization, ITC-ILO, in Turin, in Italy. The ITC-ILO is the training arm of the ILO, the specialized agency of the United Nations, which promotes social justice and human rights in the world of work. The center delivers face-to-face and online training activities for individual learners, plus a range of capacity development services for institutional partners in support of decent work and sustainable development. Last year and this year, I was commissioned together with my dear colleague Kyungmi Lee to evaluate the online training activities in 2020 and 2021 in the light of the sudden shift towards online distance training during the pandemic. Kyungmi Lee is a senior lecturer in technology-enhanced learning at the University of Lancaster, and our contact point at the ITC-ILO for the evaluation was Iman El-Masri, who was the quality assurance officer. I think both ladies are here in the room. Let me say it was a pleasure working together with you, as always. We will present together a paper in a concurrent session about this evaluation tomorrow. Here I will just highlight a few things that are relevant to illustrate the center's achievements and contribution to the global lifelong learning at a distance, the outreach of the learning activities, as well as the different online delivery modes of training courses. This is where the quote comes from. We want to touch 1 million lives. The director of training, Andreas Klemmer, said this in an interview. The vision of massive outreach through online distance training. While ODL training accounted for only 4% of the center's activities in 2019, it grew up to 48% by the end of 2021. The center can now reach more than 50,000 learners per year, twice the number achieved before the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. If they go further this route of online distance learning, I am convinced that it is not an unrealistic goal to reach 1 million people. We sent a survey to the participants of 20 selected fully online training activities offered in 2020 and also 21. We received over 1,200 responses from 151 different countries. Based on their experiences with online learning, the participants were asked what kind of format they would prefer in the future, choosing between face-to-face courses on campus in Turin or at a regional training center, blended learning courses with a combination of face-to-face and online sessions, and fully online flexible distance learning courses. A stunning result was that 75% said in 2021 that they would prefer blended or fully online learning. And in 2022, this number was still 68%. So online distance learning is really here to stay. However, access to stable internet connection remains a problem in many countries. About 50% of the participants from African and Asian countries agreed or strongly agreed that they had regular issues with internet connectivities that disrupted their online learning. Some conclusions. ERT in 2020 was an enormous challenge for the center, but also at the same time a huge opportunity. The outreach doubled since 2019 and continues to grow. Especially participants from middle-income countries can take advantage of digital learning solutions, avoiding costs for travel and accommodation. However, access to stable infrastructure for online learning remains a problem, and it is always essential to find the right mix of face-to-face and online, and more importantly, between asynchronous and synchronous media to reach the target groups. After looking at this example and after looking back into the past, I would like to speculate a little bit in the last part of my talk about current trends and future developments of educational technology in online distance education. The following observation is very interesting, based on all the work I have done on research trends in distance education and bibliographic studies. There have been alternating waves of research. There were triggers on the meso or macro level that initiated a new line of research, the foundation of distance teaching universities and their institutional consolidation, quality problems and high dropout rates, the emergence of the virtual university, big data, learning analytics, and artificial intelligence. And a response on the micro level, the level of teaching and learning, the introduction of instructional design and student support systems, responding to quality problems, the internet to support online interaction and collaboration, and the creation of intelligent support system. According to various reports from the UNESCO, the Nesta Foundation, the UCL Knowledge Lab, or the Horizon Report, artificial intelligence applications, AI Ed, is one of the currently hottest emerging fields in educational technology. We did a systematic review of AI applications in higher education that was published in 2019 in the International Journal of Educational Technology in Higher Education. This year we just did an update of this systematic review for the German Parliament, the Bundestag, for the Office for Technology Assessment. In our review, we found that the field is highly dominated by researchers from the STEM disciplines. Less than 10% of the included studies were led by educators. That's why we asked, where are the educators, in the title of our article. Of course, educators have to be involved in interdisciplinary projects to develop meaningful applications for teaching and learning. And AI Ed is really an exploding field of research. In our update, from November 2018 until the end of 2021, in this short period of time, almost 3 times as many studies on AI Ed have been published as in the previous decade. And still, the proportion of educational researchers is low. It has increased only slightly from 9 to 14%. In 2019, over 98% of the AI Ed studies were conducted in the context of higher education. We now see more and more applications in the K-12, but also in continuing education and vocational training, although still on a low level. But I'm quite sure that these areas in particular will grow in the near future. But let me give a few examples only. The biggest area of AI methods application is educational data mining or learning analytics. We term this area profiling and prediction. This example shows a student information dashboard in a study from the Open University that helps faculty members to reach out to students at risk in the sense of an early warning system. This is great. However, on the condition that ethical issues and issues of privacy are not violated, and that students and faculty members give their consent and know what kind of data is collected and analyzed and for what purposes. In China, in particular, there seem to be no limits to the analysis of student data. This is an example of a so-called classroom behavior management system with video installations in the classroom to detect students' emotions or abnormal behavior, like inattention, cell phone use in class, leaving seats, etc. We know that positive teacher-student relationships are most important for students' learning. What influence, then, can such a system have on this relationship? I think such questions need to be discussed, and those examples illustrate that the application of technology is sometimes questionable. Another interesting area of AI application are automated grading or essay scoring systems. Gill and colleagues report on an impressive example where an automated grading system was used in a large-scale assessment, the Medical Council of Canada qualifying examination. 5,500 students took the test in 2013, and 100 raters needed 4 days, approximately 3,000 hours, to score the items. In the study of Gill, a supervised machine learning algorithm was used to grade the test. The researchers arrived at over 98% agreement between the AI and the human raters. More importantly, they needed only 3.5 hours for training the algorithm and then just 10 seconds to score the entire 2013 examination. But again, ethical questions and concerns come in here. Will AI take away the jobs of educators? How are human raters involved in automatic grading to arrive at trustworthy results? Tomorrow there will be also a presentation on automated assessments by our team, by John Bai, in the Inspiring Innovation session. I would like to highlight a few points in my conclusion. We have a long heritage of open and distance education in terms of theory, research, and practice we can build upon to inform evidence-based practice, especially with regard to the instructional design, student and faculty support systems, and synchronous and, more importantly, asynchronous media for dialogue, interaction, and collaboration. The opportunities or advantages of digital media do not lie in the technology itself, but in their pedagogical integration to support strong student-teacher relationships and interaction among students. The exploding field of AI ed research and practice is not driven by educators. The majority of research is dominated by technical and methodological studies, and pedagogical and also ethical consideration are most often neglected. Despite the enormous opportunities of AI, using Beck's concept of the risk society, I think AI is a high-risk technology with many unsolved ethical issues. In light of the ITC ILO case and the experiences with emergency remote teaching, it is important to rethink the concept of blended learning, getting the right mix in terms of space and time, synchronous and asynchronous media. Florence Martin refers to this as bichronous online learning, and I think this term is on the spot. Furthermore, it is important to stress that the lifelong learning rhetoric often puts the responsibility on an individual citizen to cope with the risk or challenges by learning, as it was also written in the Fauré report, moving the responsibility away from educational institutions or national educational systems. However, lifelong learning and open education concern more than issues related to access and widening participation. Reaching out to large numbers is not enough. Widening access comes with duties and responsibility of taking care of and providing support, especially for non-traditional learners who might lack the skills for independent digital learning. Distance teaching institutions have always been helping institutions with their student support systems. Archer and Prinsloo remind us that the best intentions of opening up educational opportunities throughout the lifespan might have harmful effects. They talk about an ethics of care, which proposes that providing access without providing reasonable care to ensure success is actually justice denied. One last thing. It is my pleasure, at the end of my talk, to announce the new Open Access Handbook of Open Distance and Digital Education in Springer's major reference series. Together with Professor In-Sung Jung from Japan and South Korea, I started planning this handbook already in 2019, and we were able to find money to make it open access. I hope it will generate a huge impact, as it will probably provide the most comprehensive overview of the whole field of ODDE. It will have 80 chapters written by more than 120 authors from 25 countries. We hope the real book will be ready by the end of this year, but 57 chapters are already available in the living online edition on the Springer website for free download. The handbook consists of 6 volumes addressing all the issues related to the macro, meso, and micro level of ODDE. I would like to finish my talk with a quote on lifelong learning. It is in German, but we can use a powerful AI tool, of course, to translate the text in a second. Here it is. "It is bad enough," exclaimed Eduard, "that you can't learn anything now for the rest of your life. Our ancestors stuck to the lessons they received in their youth, but we now have to relearn every 5 years if we don't want to go completely out of fashion." Guess who wrote this paragraph? Of course, as a German, I bring a quote from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who wrote this in 1809. It shows very nicely that the concept of lifelong learning is not at all a completely new phenomenon. And that being said, I thank you very much for your attention.